Jai Nitya Vishnu Vishnu Pada Paramahamsa Parivrajaka Ashto Tarasata Shishi Mad His Divine Grace of High Charana Ravinda Bhaktivinoda Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. ISKCON BBT Founder Charya save the whole world Srila Prabhupada Ki. Jai Nitya Vishnu Vishnu Pada Paramahamsa Parivrajaka Ashto Tarasata Shishi Mad His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Ki. Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda Ki. Namacharya Sri Haridas Thakur Ki. Prem Sakaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Sri Hari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Ki. Sri Radha Krishna Gopinath Shamakund Radha Kund Giri Govardhana Ki. Braj Bhumi Shivindama Dama Ki. Navadvip Mayapur Dama Ki. Purushtam Chatra Jagannathpuri Dama Ki. Ganga Mai Ki, Jamuna Mai Ki, Bhakti Devi Ki, Tulasi Maharani Ki, Samaveta Bhakti Vrinda Ki, Jai Nitai Gopremanandi. Oh, glorious to some glories. Oh, glorious to some glories. Oh, glorious to some glories. Oh, glorious glories. Veda Shri Guru and Shri Guranga. Oh, glorious to Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Tada Vikunta Dishanat Tada Vikunta Dishanat Tada Vikunta Dishanat Tayo Nipatamanayo Tayo Nipatamanayo Tayo Nipatamanayo Tada Vikunta Dishanat Tayo Nipatamanayo Haha Karo Mahan Asit Haha Karo Mahan Asit Haha Karo Mahan Asid Vimanagriyeshu Putraka Vimanagriyeshu Putraka Vimanagriyeshu Putraka. It's interesting, the demigods are addressed here as Putraka, so Putra means like a worthy son. So it's interesting they use that word. Hahakaro Mahanasit Vimanagriyeshu Putraka Tadavikunta Dishanat Tayo Nipatamanayo Hahakaro Mahanasid Vimanagriyeshu Putraka Tadavikunta Dishanat Tayo Nipatamanayo Hahakaro Mahanasid Vimanagriyeshu Putraka Tadavikunta Dishanat Tayo Nipatamanayo Hahakaro Mahanasid Vimanagriyeshu Putraka. Tada, then, Vikunta of the Supreme Lord, Dishanat from the abode, Tayo as both of them. Manayo, we're falling. Ha kara, roaring in disappointment. Mahan, great. Asit, occurred. Vimana agriyeshu, in the best of airplanes. Putrakaha, O demigods. Translation. Then as Jai and Vijay fell from the Lord's abode, a great roar of disappointment arose from all the demigods who were sitting in their splendid airplanes. Responsively. Then, as Jai and Vijay fell from the Lord's abode, a great roar of disappointment arose from all the demigods who were sitting in their splendid planes. There's no purport here. It's interesting how this great roar of disappointment, because obviously we can see that to some extent the Devatas are considering their position as permanent and that they're not going to, and this is described in other sections of the Bhagavatam, how that there's no sense of impending death or anything like that for the Devatas, except in the last year of their life. They get this sense of impending doom. Whereas here, in this material world, one who's intelligent can see it every moment and every day. There is this sense of impending doom. It's like we are very, very aware that this body is temporary. And Krishna, he points this out in this material world, this dukkhalayam ashashvatam, that is by nature temporary and full of misery. That's our position in this material world. And here, you're living in a big city, you can hear ambulance sirens and fire sirens, all these things going all day long. And obviously, the ambulances, they're not only dealing with people who've got cuts and bruises and things like that. They're dealing with people who are dying. And we understand this, that every moment and every day, people are entering into the abode of death. So we're lucky here as we have this sense of how precarious, as Lochan Das Thakur, he says, Kamala Dala Jala Jivana Talamala. He says his life is tottering like a drop of water on the lotus petal or the lotus leaf. You see with the lotus leaf, where I live in New Govardhan, there's a lake that we have lotuses growing in there. And when it rains, you can see what happens is the lotus is I'm going to keep this open because I want to read some more from it. The lotus petal, or the lotus leaf, is kind of shaped like this. Yeah? And what happens is when it rains, is the water falls into the middle of it, and it accumulates, it builds up. and builds up and builds up. And then it gets to a critical mass sort of thing, and the lotus leaf just goes sideways like that, and all the water empties out. And because it's got some sort of hairs and wax or something like that, the water, it doesn't actually get wet. It's protected from the water. It's got like a protective coating on it, and so all the water empties out. So Lord Chandas Thakur, he's saying that my life is tottering. He uses this word tottering. Like sometimes you'll have something that's tottering on the edge. It could fall over at any minute. And it's very interesting that he uses this word. My life is tottering like a drop of water on the lotus leaf. At any moment, our life could be finished. And you just never know. I think I've told this story before. I was in the U.S. in 2011 when the attacks were on the World Trade Center. And while I was waiting to depart the U.S., we heard a story of how a plane had taken off from LaGuardia Airport, and as I was sort of going up to their cruising altitude, one of the engines fell off, and it crashed through the roof of a house. Fortunately, there was no one in the house at the time, but you can see that these calamities can happen at any moment. We could all be sitting here, and an engine of a plane could drop through the roof, and we'd all be wiped out. You have no idea. You just never know what's going to happen. And actually, I remember years ago I was in Melbourne, and I was not far behind, but I was coming down the street. And just a few minutes before I got there was one of those big cranes was lifting a big concrete slab up in the sky, and the thing dropped off the crane and fell down and smashed the car and killed all the occupants in the car. These things can happen at any moment. You've got no warning. That you hear one moment, gone the next, just like that, just in a moment. But the demigods, they don't have that sense. So when they see someone falling from the spiritual realm, there's haram, what a horrible situation. They're very disturbed by that, especially falling these giant Vijaya falling from Vaikuntha. That's very, very unusual. How can someone fall from Vaikuntha? But we can understand, and we'll see that this is really clearly pointed out in verse 37, where Brahma, he explains to the Devatas, he says, my dear sons, the Lord is the controller of the three modes of nature and is responsible for creation, preservation, and dissolution of the universe. His wonderful creative power, Yogamaya, cannot be easily understood even by the masters of yoga. That personality of Godhead will alone come to our rescue. He's talking about how... and then in the previous verse he says that there is no remedy within my power. He's saying, I can't do anything about this. However, for it is the Lord himself who desires to do all this. So he's pointing out here, Brahma's pointing out to the Devatas, that there's nothing we can do about this because this is happening under the Lord's personal supervision. He wants this to happen. That giant Vijay, because of their disrespecting Lakshmi, have been caused to come down here to this material world. But it's not just that, the disrespecting Lakshmi is almost like an external reason. The internal reason is that Krishna wanted to enjoy some fighting pastimes. He wanted to enjoy some chivalrous ras. And of course, he can only really enjoy those types of pastimes with his devotees. Therefore, he sent giant Vijay down here. Created this scenario with Lakshmi, created this scenario with the Kumaras, because Lakshmi is not going to curse. She was not happy with what happened, but then so the Kumaras come and they curse giant Vijay because they feel like they're being disrespected. So they curse giant Vijay to come down here, and suffer in the material world. But we can see that ultimately, it's all the plan of Krishna, because these things can't happen. The Lord's the Lord's gatekeepers, his personal servants, they can't be sent down here by any ordinary person. They can't leave the spiritual world by the arrangement of anyone other than Krishna. So he's made this arrangement for them to come down here to perform pastimes. And also, to shake up the Devatas, help them, to help them become a little bit more dependent upon Krishna, to remind them that actually they're not the controllers and that Krishna is the controller. Because we see here what happens in this pastime is the the Devatas are actually driven out of their abodes by Hiranyakashipu. He takes over the full management of the universe. He's a very, very powerful person. And it's also being described here in this chapter how all around they could see darkness prevailing. And this was due to the prowess of these two asuras being in the womb of Diti. Very, very powerful personalities. But their power was derived from Krishna or from Vishnu. It's only because of the potency of Lord Vishnu that they were able to exert such extraordinary power. So it's very, very... it's actually a beautiful pastime, this. And we see here in this chapter also how when the Kumaras, they curse giant Vijay, and then Vishnu comes. What's the disturbance happening here at the door? So he comes, and he's glorifying the Kumaras and saying how there's a wonderful verse, I think it might be verse 16 or something like that. I've always remembered this verse, from years ago reading it. He's glorifying the Brahmanas, and because they're sort of dwarf Brahmanas, and I can't remember where the verse is, but it's a wonderful verse where he mentions that oblations offered into the fire are not nowhere near as dear to him as these offerings of food that are offered in the mouth of the Brahmanas that are dripping with ghee. That's kind of really interesting. So basically what he's saying is like, service of the Brahmana is considered to be very, very important. And he even mentions it in one place. The Lord mentions that even the Brahmanas are so dear to me that if my arm offends you, I will cut it off. So he's placing the Brahmanas as being very, very important and very, very elevated, but also worshipable. Because the Brahmanas, it actually mentions in a verse in the Rig Veda that says, Om Tad Vishnu Paramam Param Pashanti Suraya Divi Vachakshuratatam Tad Vipaso Vibamniro Jagvigunsa Samindate Vishnu Yat Paramam Padam. This is just as the, let's see, how does it go? Just as the, talks about how the sun rays illuminates the sky, but it's saying that the Brahmanas, they're actually able to see the abode of Lord Vishnu. And because they can see the abode of Lord Vishnu, they're able to also reveal that to others. So, the Brahman, in the Varnashram system, we have the Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. We also have, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, Brahmacharya, and Sannyasa. So we have the four Varnas and the four ashrams. So with the different Varnas, they all have their function. And the Sudras are considered to be like the legs of society. They're the ones who actually do all the work. And the Vaishyas, they're the ones who provide. They do all the commerce and look after cows and things like that. So they're providing all these things. Then the Kshatriyas, their business is protect. But the Brahmana, they have a unique position. The Brahmana's position is to lead. The Brahmana's position is to guide. The Brahmana's position is to ultimately give spiritual knowledge so that the living entity can return back to Godhead. So the position of a Brahmana is very, very unique and very, very important. And the Brahmana is actually compared to the head. So even though the head, may not taste food, digest food, all these types of things, the head actually enables us to do so many things because the head's where we think, the head's where we direct. So the different varnas are compared to different parts of the body. So the head, we can understand the head is the most important part of the body because by the head, by the thinking capacity, we're able to achieve all the things we need to do in life. So and this is one of the points that Krishna is making here, or Vishnu is making to the Kumaras, is the importance of the Brahmanas and how the Brahmanas are very, very dear to him. And he's making the point that actually the Brahmanas are more dear to him than his own self. So, yeah, very beautiful description here of the importance of Brahmanas. Then, as I mentioned, there's no purport, so if you don't mind, I'll read the next verse and purport. Taveva hyaduna prapto parshada pravaro hare dite chatara nivishtam kashyapam teja ulvanam. Lord Brahma continued, these two principal doorkeepers of the personality of Godhead have now entered the womb of Diti, the powerful semen of Kashyapa Muni having covered them. So Brahma is describing also a bit of the process of creation, not creation, sorry, how a jiva enters into the womb of a woman covered by the semen. And we see there's a verse in the later on, actually I think it's the 31st chapter of this canto, where it's described, the Lord's describing this Kamana Deva Netrena Jantu Deva Pravate Striya Pravishta Udaram Pungsareta Kanashaya. That Kamana Deva Netrena is according to the Karma Deva Netrena, and also under the supervision of the divine. Kamana Deha Jantu, the Deha, the living, the Jiva. He enters into the pungsa, the pungsareta, the semen of the male, and then through the semen of the male, he's injected into the womb of a woman to take on a particular body according to karma. So this is being described here by Brahma, and these three verses, like 33, 34, 35, they're describing the fall of Jai and Vijay from Vaikuntha. And they're taking birth in this material world, or entering into the material world, there's a purport here too. Here is clear proof of how a living entity, coming originally from Vaikuntha Loka, is encaged in material elements. The living entity takes shelter within the semen of a father, which is injected within the womb of a mother, and with the help of the mother's emulsified ovum, the living entity grows a particular type of body. In this connection, so we see here it's being Prabhupada's describing how, according to like your karma, this karmana, deva netra, so under the supervision of the divine, it means like Krishna's agencies are directing this, the material nature, whatever, is directing the jiva taking birth in a particular body. So the karma determines what type of parents you're going to wind up with. You wind up with very, very affluent parents, you can wind up with very poor parents, you can wind up in a dog body, a cat body, any type of parent. This is according to karma. And this is also, as pointed out in the 8th chapter of the Gita, where it mentions there that like, according to one's consciousness and karma at the moment of death, that's where you go in your next life. So if one's consciousness is a godly consciousness, then in the next life, one will take a godly birth. Doesn't mean you become God. The Mayavadis misinterpret that you become God, but actually you can become godly. We're jivas, we cannot take the position of God, but we can become godly, we can become like God, but we cannot actually take this position. So, according to karma and according to consciousness, then we wind up in a particular womb. And as a result of taking birth in that womb, our psychophysical nature is shaped, which then forces us to act in a particular way, causes us to, respond to things. It mentions in the 3rd chapter of the Gita how what does that verse go? I can't remember it now. 3:5. But basically, it talks about how the jiva is forced to act. Nahi kaschit chanamapi. This chanam means like a moment. Nahi kaschit chanamapi. Jatu chista yakamakrit. Savai prakriti jayagunai. I forgot one line there. Savai prakriti jayagunai. The living entity, according to the modes of nature they're covered by, cannot help but act You're forced to act by the modes of material nature. You cannot stop. And you look at living entities, different types of living entities. Like a living entity in the mode of passion is forced to act in a particular way due to the modes of nature that are influencing them. Mode of passion, mode of ignorance, mode of goodness, combination. Forced to act. Just like you look at a dog living entity or a bird living entity or whatever. How a dog acts. It runs around. Like I was sitting in the park yesterday and there's all these dogs there, and they see another dog coming. What do they do? They run up to the other dog and sniff its backside. I mean, you don't see human beings doing that. It's very strange behavior. But according to their karma, according to the modes of nature that influence them, they're forced. They can't stop doing that. They don't start to think, well, gee, why am I doing this? Why do I have this body? Why am I forced to suffer? Like we see these in these prayers from Sanatana Goswami in the 20th chapter of the Madhya Lila. He prays to Lord Chaitanya. He says, why am I forced to act according to the modes of nature? But you don't see these lower living entities thinking like that. They just go ahead and do the things that they're forced to do by the modes of nature with no thought whatsoever why this is happening. They just do it. But in the human form of life, we have this capacity to question why. Why is this happening to me? Why did I take on this body? Why am I suffering the burning threefold miseries? The human form of life is the only capacity, the only is the only form of life that has this capacity. So, but still we see that people, living entities that are in a human form of life, still they're forced to act according to the modes of nature until they start inquiring, until they start taking the spiritual path. This is the means to get out of this cycle, is by inquiring about the nature of the self. Atato Brahma Gigyasa. This is one of the very first aphorisms in the Vedanta Sutra. And it basically is saying, now that you have the human form of life, you need to inquire about the nature of the self. This is the point of the human form of life. And the Hitopadesh points this out, if you have a human form of life and you don't use this human form of life to inquire about the nature of the self, then actually you're no better than an animal. So, if you don't, and we see, if you don't inquire about the nature of the self, then you'll just wind up with an animal birth in your next life. The human form of life is a rare opportunity. And in the human form of life, the best situation is to be situated in Brahminical consciousness, to be situated in the mode of goodness, because in the mode of goodness, one can actually understand the truth. One can understand things as they are. But the modes of passion and ignorance, you're just so caught up in the workings of material nature, you completely forget about what life is for. You have no understanding of what life is about, what you're meant to be doing with your life. And you just think it's for eating, sleeping, mating, defending, sleeping, all these types of things. You're just caught up in the animal propensities. And this is the point that's made in the Hitopadesh. This is ahara nidabaya maitaramcha samanya etat pashabina. It says that the activities of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending are common to both men and animals. But it says it mentions this adiko vishesho, but the human form of life, it has one special quality. The vishesha means like a special quality. Adi means this one special quality, that this dharma, to practice dharma. So if in the human form of life we don't practice dharma, then we have no possibility of escaping the influence of the modes of nature. That's the first thing. And actually, as Hitopadesh is pointing out, but we're no better than an animal because we're only engaging in animal propensities. So when we come to the human form of life, we need to be intelligent. We need to use this human form of life for what it's meant for. It has this special feature. It's actually meant for practicing dharma. Dharma means understanding the nature of the self and understanding the nature of the Supreme. So if we don't pursue that, then we don't deserve a human life. And therefore, we'll take birth as animals. So this is the very, very important point of having a human form of life. In this connection, it is to be remembered that the mind of Kashyapa Muni was not in order when he conceived the two sons, Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu. Now Prabhupada is going to talk quite a bit extensively, well not extensively, but a bit about the consciousness that is there when a man and a woman engage in union, and how important this consciousness is. Because if the man and woman, if their consciousness is just caught up in lusty desires and trying to enjoy their senses, then this consciousness is impressed upon the child, or it attracts a child of that nature. And then the child comes out performing various inauspicious activities because it has this inauspicious consciousness. And you see what happens is, like when you're born in a particular family, due to the external influences you have, the mother, the father, brother, sister, whatever the environment you're living in, this shapes your consciousness. This shapes the way your values, your principles, and therefore you act in a particular way, and your karma manifests like that. So it all comes out due to the consciousness, or the karma and consciousness come out in this way. So Kashyapa Muni's mind was not in order when he conceived the two sons. He was influenced by the mode of passion, and he said this to Didi: "This is not a good time to have children. Otherwise, because Lord Shiva is roaming about with his associates and things like that. Therefore, the semen he discharged was simultaneously extremely powerful, because he's extremely powerful, and mixed with a quality of anger. It is to be concluded that while conceiving a child, one's mind must be very sober and devotional. So then, if you have a sober devotional consciousness when you're conceiving a child, you'll wind up with a sober devotional child. So, whatever state of mind you're in when you're conceiving the child, that is what influences the child. For this purpose, the Garbhadan Samskar is recommended in Vedic scriptures. If the mind of the father is not sober, the semen discharge will not be very good. Thus, the living entity wrapped in the matter produced from father and mother will be demonic, like Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu. So he's saying that the living entity wrapped in the modes, wrapped in the matter produced from the mother and father. So, there's an interesting statement by Albert Einstein, where he says that insanity means that you keep doing the same thing and expect a different outcome. So in this situation, if one is, we can see this in relation to the modes of nature, if one is in the mode of passion, and then to expect you're going, like when you're conceiving the child, for instance, if you're in the mode of passion or ignorance when you're conceiving the child, and you're expecting to have a child that's a devotee, that's insanity. That's never going to happen. One needs to have the proper consciousness. So, if you want to, bring a living entity into the world, and as a responsible human being, understanding that the purpose of the human form of life is to practice Dharma, to develop God consciousness, to go back home to the spiritual realm, then, if you're going to engage in this activity of procreation, and we see it's also pointed out in the 5th chapter of the 5th canto, where Rishabh Devi is explaining to his sons, is Guru Nasha Sat Sanoja Sat Pitana Sat Janani Nasha Sat, that one shouldn't take on any of these positions of responsibility of being a guru, a devata, a father, a mother. You shouldn't take on any of these positions unless you're capable of delivering your dependence from the cycle of repeated birth and death. This is the point. This is the real point here of the human form of life, is not to come here just to enjoy yourself and to have life after life after life in this material world. The point of the human form of life is to develop God consciousness and go back to the spiritual realm. So when one takes the position of being, getting married and then wanting to be a father or mother or whatever, then the important point to understand is, what is your responsibility? Your responsibility is to have children that are capable of returning back home to Godhead. So this begins with procreation. This begins with the consciousness at the point of procreation, is by having this consciousness, sober devotional consciousness, as Prabhupada is pointing out here in the purport, so that the children also develop this sober and devotional consciousness. Otherwise, if you don't have this consciousness, better you don't procreate. better you don't have children, because they'll just wind up having the consciousness that you had at the point of conception. And then Prabhupada's final statement, the conditions of conception are to be carefully studied. This is a very great science. So Prabhupada's giving a very clear instruction here for anyone who who wants to have children, to be a grihastha and have children, that it's really important to understand this, as Prabhupada says, this very great science. How it is that the jiva enters into the womb, and how it is that the jiva is influenced, or not just influenced, but actually controlled, as I mentioned from this verse in the third chapter of the Gita, how the jiva is controlled by the modes of material nature and cannot refrain from acting according to the modes of nature, cannot avoid the modes of nature that are impressed upon it at the point of conception. So, if our interest is to attract a child who has the possibility of becoming God conscious, we therefore must, at the point of, even before the point of procreation, we must develop clear consciousness. Clear consciousness meaning we're able to focus our consciousness on Krishna. And then when it comes to the point of wanting to have children, then we practice, various spiritual or spiritual practices, such as chanting 64 rounds and things like that, in order to have good consciousness at the point of procreation, so that we attract the jiva who is actually got good potential, who actually has good potential to become Krishna conscious. And who knows, we could even attract the Mukta Purush, if one's consciousness is clear enough and focused enough on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, and this is the I guess the focus with all of our activities and practices in Krishna consciousness. It is done as an offering to Krishna. Whatever we do is done as an offering to Krishna. It's done as a service to Krishna, so that our consciousness is as focused as possible on the Lord, so that the outcome will be as Krishna conscious as possible. In all our activities, not just in having children, but in every activity we do in spiritual life. The idea is to do that activity for the pleasure of Krishna. And in this way, by doing the activity for the pleasure of Krishna, it becomes freed from the contamination of wanting to do something for my pleasure. Just like, we cook for the deities. And when you're cooking for the deities, I'm going to put some curd in it, and, put some turmeric so the curd looks really nice, and, all these different types of things. I'm going to put the cauliflower and potato, and boy, this is going to taste really good. The offering becomes contaminated with your consciousness, because you want to enjoy the offering. But rather, if we can meditate upon, for the pleasure of the spiritual master or Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada has taught devotees how to cook, in a way that's pleasing to Krishna. We see also in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, there are many nice descriptions of the different times that Lord Chaitanya was offered, various offerings and things like that. The Raghava Pandit's sister, she made these little bags of prasad for Lord Chaitanya, so these things are described. When they had the chip rice festival, the prasad there is described. So if we're meditating on these types of sort of offerings, or meditating on our service in this way, of what is pleasing to Krishna, like when you dress the deities, you can dress the deities. Well, if I dress the deities like this, my friends are going to think, wow, he's such so good at dressing the deities. Or I can dress the deities in this way because it's pleasing to the Lord. It might be, okay, it's a cold day today, so I want to make sure that the Lord's got warm clothing on. Or it's a festival today, so I want to dress the deities in a way that the deities are very attractive for the devotees, so their minds are attracted to Krishna. Not that I'm putting me in the center, but I'm putting Krishna in the center. And in this way, all our activities become transcendental. So it's very important to try to develop the appropriate consciousness of how to please Krishna through our activities. And in that way, there's more and more, there's never any guarantee, but in that way there's more likelihood that the outcome of the activity will be fully transcendental. Because I guess it's always going to be transcendental if our consciousness is focused on Krishna. But what my point here is, say for instance with the point of procreation, even though one may strictly follow the process, may be strictly engaged in Krishna consciousness and trying their best to unite with their wife to have God conscious children, there's no guarantee the child will be God conscious. And we can see a very good example is there in the pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu with Advaita Acharya. He had 6 sons. So 3 of his sons were great unalloyed devotees of the Lord, pure unalloyed devotees of the Lord, Achyutananda and 2 others. But 3 of his sons were completely averse to the practice of bhakti. So even we see someone like Advaita Acharya can have children that are averse to the practice of bhakti, so what to speak of ourselves? But if Prabhupada discusses this in the 6th chapter of the Gita also, that verse that where he talks about being born into the family of a Brahmin or rich aristocracy, and there he mentions that if the parents are pure devotees, then the likelihood of a pure devotee being born to them is very, very great. So it's clearly spelt out in the scriptures that this science of conception and how to ensure or to give yourself the best chance of having a good devotee child. And that's the point of conception. It's not just to procreate like rabbits and have many children just because you're enjoying sex life. The point is to bring God conscious people into the world, and to inspire, even they're not God conscious at the point of conception, but to inspire them to become God conscious through our conduct. This is the point of procreation. It is not just to enjoy ourselves like cats and dogs, because if that's our endeavor, then we will become cats and dogs in our next life. But if our endeavor is to unite for the purpose of having God-conscious children and to try to raise our children to be God-conscious, this in itself is bhakti. This in itself is devotional service. Krishna says, kamosmi bhattarasava, that I am sex life, which is done according to religious principles. So if we're doing according to religious principles, if we're trying our best to have God-conscious children, then this is bhakti. Even sex life can be understood as bhakti if it is done with a proper consciousness and for the proper purpose. But if it's just done for enjoyment, it's no better than the cats and the dogs. It's the same thing. So, very important instructions here. Okay, any questions, comments, corrections? Yes, Marji. Sorry, I can't quite hear you. Yeah, we see like with the demigods, they're in some ways they're a bit of a mixed bag. Some of the demigods are very, very elevated, and some of them are not so elevated. But they also, they are devotees. That's the underlying thing. They are devotees, and when the chips are down, so to speak, when there's some challenge, they don't try to deal with it themselves. They don't try to. And it's just like the final statement Lord Brahma says here. Because he's saying, we just understand that this is Krishna's arrangement. And he said, what purpose can we serve on his behalf by deliberating on the subject? What's the point of talking about this? Because it's all in his hands. So that they're just accepting that whatever's going on is Krishna's arrangement. All I need to do is surrender to Krishna. So even though they are mixed devotees, they are very advanced devotees. They're very elevated devotees. They're not prema bhaktas. They're not on that level at all, but they are still quite advanced. And whenever there is some major calamity, like in their day-to-day dealings, it seems like they're somewhat absorbed in sense gratification. But when it really comes to it, when the chips are down and there's no other solution, no other rectification of the situation, they turn to Krishna. And also they have Lord Brahma as their guide, Lord Brahma as their father, in that sense. And he's their guide. And generally speaking, Lord Brahma is a very, very advanced devotee, and sometimes even a pure devotee. So, he guides them to spiritual life. And we do see that sometimes, particularly, towards the ends of their life, the Devatas, generally will focus on bhakti. But the point is that they have a service to do. So, Indra's the king of the demigods, and Vayu's in charge of the wind, and Agni's in fire, and all this sort of stuff. So they have a service to do. So it's probably not the best thing they all go back home to Godhead, because then who's going to do the service? So they're here for a particular period of time to do the service, and you'll see there's a cycle of people who go through all these services, and every in every day of Brahma there's 14 manus, and they're all given different different. The posts have got different names, and it's a lot of sort of cyclic sort of whatever you call it. But we see that there's that these posts always need to be filled. So right now you have these personalities who have their different names. Like Indra's got his name and stuff like his actual name, but Indra's the post, and so there's a certain personality who fills that post. Sometimes you'll see that they only last there for a certain while and it gets changed over. Like one time Indra went down to be a hog, and then so someone was filling in for him, but wasn't doing a particularly good job, and but generally speaking, that they'll remain in that post for the duration of the period, and then sometimes we'll see that they will be intent on going back to the spiritual world. Other times, the Bhagavatam describes that they'll go on to some other service or some other calling. Some of them, obviously, some of them will want to go back to Godhead, but usually there's quite a bit of purification required, and they have other service. And you'll see how it describes in the Bhagavatam how so and so will be the manu or whatever. So then they'll go into some other role in the administration of the universe and stuff like that. But they've got a service to do, so they don't. Prabhu. Well, it depends on what specifically you're talking about. Like in the case of someone like Prahlad Maharaj, this is a particular pastime that Krishna wanted to perform, because he wanted to have this fight with Hiranyakashipu. He had some chivalrous rasa that he wanted to indulge. So Prahlad Maharaj appeared in that family for different reasons. One of the reasons is to show the greatness of the devotee, and how even though in the most trying circumstances he was still focused upon the Lord. And we see that Prahlad Maharaj was put into many, many difficult situations by his father, yet still he didn't become inimical or angry with his father, and he maintained his focus on the Lord. So it's to show the greatness of the devotee, but also to show the mercy of a devotee, because even at the end, after his father was killed, he wanted his father to be liberated. He wanted his father to go back to Godhead. But also, it also shows the merciful nature of the Lord, and it gives the Lord an opportunity to perform various pastimes. So there's lots of different things going on. But then in the sense of, just like ordinary persons like ourselves, being born in the family of non-devotees, sometimes in the family of demons, the process of bhakti is very powerful. And by the mercy of the Vaishnavas, we even a person who's born in an atheistic or demoniac family can come into touch with the process of bhakti. And through that contact, whether it's a book, prasadam, hear the holy name, the Harinam, things like that, it has the capacity to kindle that spark of bhakti which is there in the heart of every jiva. And so even though one may be born in a very, very impious or atheistic or demoniac position, still through the process of bhakti, that can be that spark of devotion can be awoken within the heart of the jiva. And now we see that in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Rupa Goswami explains that generally speaking, one only comes to bhakti because of prior experience of bhakti. So in a past life we practice bhakti. And then he makes the point, well, how is it that others come to bhakti? And then he makes the point that is due to the mercy of a pure unalloyed devotee. So we see that when someone comes into contact with a greatly advanced devotee, this is the someone who's not a devotee comes into contact with a greatly advanced devotee. This is the stimulus, if you like, for awakening bhakti within that person. So it doesn't really matter at one level what your birth is, who your parents are. It matters what you do with that birth. But of course, being born in the family of great devotees is also a benediction, because it means you don't have to deal with, generally speaking, with all these other kind of negative aspects of the material world, because your consciousness is from the point of birth focused upon Krishna. So it's a much better situation. But the nature of bhakti is that no matter what situation you're born in, is you can become a great devotee by practicing bhakti. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Yeah, that's about all I know. I don't know any more than that. Huh?
That's actually interesting. It's very interesting to understand why would the poor people stop their own voice?
By Krishna's Yoga Maya. It's pastime. So the pastimes come about due to the Lord's Yoga Maya. He makes these arrangements. Because Lakshmi is Krishna's pleasure potency, or Vishnu's pleasure potency. So, she's her goal is simply to act for the pleasure of the Lord. So that she's engaged in a pastime where Jai and Vijay don't recognize her, and she gets angry. We understand this is all simply Krishna's pastime potency making arrangements so he can perform particular pastimes. The Yoga Maya is making these arrangements. So it's the Yoga Maya, the Lila Shakti, making all these different arrangements for Krishna's pastimes. That's all it is. Anything that's arrangement, that's the jiva interacting with Krishna, we can understand this is coming from Yoga Maya. She's making these arrangements. Also, we see when Krishna's pleasure potency is acting in these ways, it's for his pleasure, it's for his pastime. It's just an arrangement that's being made just to enable Krishna to perform pastimes with his devotees. And we see, as a result of this, two very, very wonderful pastimes happen. And there's so many devotees involved in this interaction. All the Devatas are involved, and we see that Prahlad Maharaj is involved. So wonderful pastimes. But it's all simply going about because of Yoga Maya. She's making these arrangements and engaging different Shaktis in making these arrangements. That's about all I know about it. I've never heard it described like that. The thing is, like, if one is practicing these various samskaras, what is the motive? If the motive is so, I can have, say for instance, I'll do Garbhadam samskara so I can have a child who's going to be, a good businessman, make lots of money so I can have a good life. That's not going to rectify one's consciousness. That's just, perpetuating the existing consciousness to enjoy this material world. But if one's purpose behind doing the Garbhadam samskara or whatever process we follow is to attract a great devotee of Krishna, then that is purifying, because you're doing it for Krishna's pleasure. And when the consciousness is connected with Krishna, then the consciousness is becoming purified. So it depends on what the motive is when you're doing that act. If the motive is simply for your sense enjoyment, then it's contaminating. If the motive is pleasing Krishna or serving Krishna, then it's purifying. What's it connected to? That's what you've got to look at. And then you can understand the outcome. Yeah? Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki, Jai Nitai Gopremanandi, Bo. Hare Krishna.